I'm Tabitha Rock.
And I'm Sam Davenport.
Born and bred in Melbourne, we live and breathe property, and we know the Melbourne market like the back of our hand. We've both been buying and selling real estate in Metro Melbourne for over 2 decades combined, and we've learned a few lessons along the way. We're back, baby.
Here we are.
More of for your listening pleasure.
The Prop Culture Podcast.
But this week, underquoting and overquoting. But underquoting, it's such a controversial word in Melbourne.
I know. What a hot topic.
People love it.
Has been a hot topic for many, many years. Because in Melbourne, we are an auction-centric market.
Mm-hmm.
We auction our properties and we start with a quote range and we often end with a result above the top end, let's just say.
Yeah. Sometimes only a little bit above, maybe 5%, and sometimes 20, 30%.
Yeah.
And that's where sometimes we see agents getting a slap over the wrist, which, I mean, controversial opinion, but I'm not sure all the time it's the fault of the agent. Sometimes there's really unique properties that are hard to value, and therefore you put a quote range out to the market based on any sort of comparables you can draw from. But ultimately, it's the buyer's choice what they pay. And some people feel that that property is worth more to them than another one. And you can't really understand that from a mathematical perspective with comparables, the psychological factors and emotional factors of every buyer. So agents are a bit not all the time, but sometimes I feel like they're getting flack when it's not really their fault.
Yeah. I think historically we've seen a lot of examples whereby agents have knowingly put the property to market undervalue, knowing that that was going to, generate interest, generate competition, and ultimately get their vendor the best possible result, which is what they're employed to do. And so prior to there being, rules and regulations in place around that concept, that is something that was a selling tool for agents. But obviously now, Consumer Affairs Victoria's got involved and there's fines for misconduct, including underquoting and things like that. But it's certainly, the quote range has to align with a couple of different factors. Obviously the first one being, as you mentioned, comparable sales. So they're drawing on the information that they've got in the market of recent sales, which the more unique the property, the more difficult it is to get that data. But they're using those comparable sales to sort of justify where their quote range should sit. But in line with that, they're also working in with what the vendor's expectations are or what the vendor wants. So the vendor's reserve is ultimately supposed to be within, can meet the top end or within the advertised range.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that a lot of sometimes vendors don't really understand the value of their property. So they're sort of guided a little bit from the agent. And as you said, a great way to get a huge result for a property is to quote it low. I mean, it's like bees to honey on a conservative quote. People flock to it, think they're going to get a bargain. They get emotionally attached to the property, which is exactly what the agent wants and what's in the best interest of the vendor. Then they seem to pay huge amounts of money for that property. Would they have paid it if the quote range was maybe $100,000 higher? Never know.
I mean, there's a reason for the saying, quote it low, watch it go.
Oh, yeah. The agents love that one.
I know. But that's becoming more and more outdated as well. Like often we are seeing in a Melbourne market, often we're seeing properties sell within or at the top end of the quote range, maybe ever so slightly above, particularly in the properties where they're valued slightly lower. So say, for example, in the early ones or something like that, it might be quoted 1.15 to 1.25 and it sells for 1.23. Or it sells for 1.259. So very near to that range. But should we start with the technical definition?
We probably should.
Of underquoting, and this is from Consumer Affairs Victoria. So underquoting can occur when a property is advertised at a price that is less than the estimated selling price, so the advertised quote range, is less than the seller's asking price, so the vendor's reserve, or has already been rejected by the seller.
And that's a really important one. So, but there's a lot of grey to this. So oftentimes buyers will give agents a verbal offer. So the quote range is 1 to 1-1. They give them a verbal offer of 1-1. It gets rejected by the vendor. Technically, they should probably lift that quote range and the baseline should be 1-1, the offer that's been rejected. But that's not an offer. A verbal offer is not an offer. It needs to be written. So that's why we say to buyers, whenever we put forward offers, they're typically always on a contract of sale because it carries a lot of weight. But also, you know, if it is rejected, that then means that the agent has to raise that quote range.
It's rejected, but you're also changing the course of the campaign, which can be beneficial depending on the circumstances of the sale.
Yeah, and something we'll talk about, I mean, it's a fine line because we'll talk about overquoted later, but, you know, if you get the pricing wrong right off the bat as a vendor, you can severely hurt your campaign and the result of the sale of your property. So you do want to be just a little bit conservative to test the market, and then you can always raise a quote, which sadly is one of the tactics of agents, and they sort of have this two-phase pricing approach to the market. So they'll say, hi, Mr. and Mrs. Vendor, let's take the property to market at 1 to 1-1. We know you want probably closer to 1.2, but we're not sure it's worth. How about we get market feedback, buyer feedback? So we'll go 1 to 1-1, and then probably in week 1 or after week 1, in week 2, we'll raise it to that 1-1 to 1-2 mark. And then they start the campaign off. They don't potentially get the numbers through the campaign. They get pricing feedback that actually the 1 to 1-1 is about right, and it ends up staying there. So, I mean, if I was to sell my property, I would always quote conservatively because I do want that initial market feedback around price, because ultimately the property is only worth what the market is prepared to pay. I mean, I've always got my thoughts and dreams and hopes around what the value of my property is, but maybe that's not correct in the market. So I'd prefer to get that market feedback first and then potentially adjust as I go.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've always thought to myself that whenever I sell my property, I'll always have it like unreserved.
Yeah.
Unreserved, must be sold.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that because I think an agent in the north kept putting just a reserve price. So instead of the quote range being like 1 to 1-1, it would have been like reserve $1 million, which was $200,000 under what they knew the property was worth. And Consumer Affairs had a bit of a problem with that because despite the vendor having the reserve of $1 million, the comparable sales actually say that the property is worth closer to 1-1 to 1-2.
Yeah.
So that wasn't allowed either, which I thought was really interesting. It's sort of like the authorities telling us how much we're allowed to sell our property for, which I don't think's the right thing either.
Yeah, well, there's a couple of different scenarios that can result in what a buyer might perceive to be an underquoted property. So, you know, the two sort of main examples could be that a vendor has held the property for 40, 50, 60 plus years. They have no mortgage on the property. They paid £48,000 for it, you know.
Pounds?
Or, you know, back originally a lot of those properties were sold in pounds.
Really?
Yeah, in Melbourne. That's like going back 70 years.
Okay.
And then, so say, for example, they've owned it for 50 years, they paid $48,000. Let's say they have no mortgage, have never had. They've maintained the property as it was, but they've never done major renovations. That type of owner oftentimes is like, my property's worth what? You know, my property's worth $2.1 million. Why? Well, because you're on a huge block of land north facing in Thornbury.
Yeah.
You know, and so that type of owner might, for example, have really low expectations. The conversation with the agents who come through, they might only ever get one agent through, for example, someone who's kept in touch with them for the last 20 years. And they bring them in and they say, oh, yeah, well, you know, we could maybe get $2 million for this. Oh, really? Okay, great. Put it on for, you know, 1.7 to 1.8, whatever they decide to do. And then it ultimately sells for 2.3. Could it have always been worth 2.3? Yes. If you had have put it on the market at 2.3 to 2.4, would you have ended up selling eventually for 2.3? Yes. Would it have passed in an auction and then sold 2 weeks later for 2.3? Yes. So it's just a different way of selling. But on the day of auction with that quote range, that property would have been perceived to have been underquoted, which in many ways it was. But it was in line with vendors' expectations, you know, all of these different things. So another way in which a property can be perceived to be underquoted is when, say, for example, a really alternate situation to that is that the vendor may have purchased the property recently, done a huge renovation to the property, and their expectations are way above market value. They need 2.4 in order to make it make sense, but the property's worth 2 mil. So let's say the vendor or the agent is, they've done their job well and they've been able to get that vendor to agree to a quote range of 1.9 to 2. That's what the property's worth. And then now on auction day passes in at 2.1. It's, surpassed the top end of the quote range, but they haven't reached vendor's reserve. They have to pass the property in. The agent in that scenario is obviously being guided by their client, and their client says, I need you to put an asking price of 2.45 on that. So that agent is forced to speak to those buyers saying, look, the reserve's 2.45. And the buyers are going, what?
Yeah.
How can it be? And the agents were hoping that through the campaign, the vendors were going to come down to market price.
Yeah, meet the market.
But in that scenario, that's definitely considered underquoting technically, legally. But I think if they were to be audited by Consumer Affairs in that scenario, they could support their quote range with recent sales.
Oh, I had it when I was a selling agent in Richmond. I can vividly remember this property in Cremorne, and we bidding, ferocious bidding. Okay, we'll break to talk to the vendor, go inside, and they're like, no, go back out there. It's not on the market yet. We want X. And my colleague and I just looked at each other and went, where did that number come from? We've never heard it. We don't know, the buyers are going to be pissed off with us because that's just not what we've been communicating with them throughout the campaign around where the vendor's expectations lie. So, but just quickly on another auction scenario I went through in Richmond, it was a property that runs parallel to Bridge Road. I can't remember the address now, but there was so many bidders. The quote was like 1.2 to 1.3. We got to 1.3, but the bidding was, and the reserve was 1.3, so it was all right. But there was so much bidding that, in fact, we broke at about 1.38, came back out, put it on the market, and then after the property was sold, a lot of buyer feedback was that it was underquoted because the auctioneer didn't actually call it on the market at 1.3, but it was always on the market at 1.3, but there was just this ferocious bidding that you just didn't want to stop the momentum of the auction.
Yeah.
So that's, I think from a buyer, consumer perspective, that's something that they don't really understand. Like if they were selling the property, they wouldn't be like, hang on, hold, get their auctioneer to run inside and stop the momentum of the bidding.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's always funny when you have these discussions about if the shoe's on the other foot, if you're selling, you would be quoting conservatively, because this is what people forget, that agents have a bunch of tools in their toolbox on how to sell a property for the best price. Styling's one, pre-sale works is another, the actual agent is another, and their buyer work. And then the other is the quote range. And yes, it needs to, be relatively justifiable through comparable sales, but it is ultimately a marketing tool.
Yeah,
I think buyers need to be aware of that and just do their own research around how much the property is worth. Do your own research. Don't rely on the agent. The agent is there to sell the property for the best price.
Yeah, we're constantly saying to our clients to, not necessarily ignore the quote range, but certainly using that quote range as hopefully a little bit of a guide of perhaps where the vendor might be. But outside of that, understanding your competition, how many buyers are going through, how many second inspections, and also recent comparable sales in the area, that's what's going to give you your best guide on what the price is likely to end up.
Yeah.
So a couple of different ways in which a property can be underquoted.
I know, but it's such a controversial word, and it's just, it makes me laugh. I go out for dinner and then I hear someone, I went to this property. It was clearly underquoted. It sold for 400 or 200 grand over the top end of the quote. No, that's buyers just feeling more, feeling it's worth more than what the agent thought it was worth and what the vendor was hoping for. Sometimes it is the buyer's problem.
It's a natural human response to grasp for control.
Yeah. So
real
true.
estate is
Point
very,
fingers.
it's very out of control when you're in the market as a buyer. It can feel, and it is very much so out of your control.
Yeah.
And so, grasping for a reason and a person to blame and why I didn't buy my dream house,
Yeah. But it's so funny because I think that us creatures love like competition and fear of missing out, and I want what they want, and that's why auctions are so successful. And like when you have a private sale, you don't really see that competition. So there's not that sort of, and it's the same, and we're going to talk about this side of the fence now, is overquoting, where you do see just it probably priced slightly incorrectly. So there's less competition. Everyone's sort of like, hang on, every property in Melbourne gets competition. So, and there's not competition on this one because so maybe there's something wrong with it. I'm not going to consider it when in fact maybe pricing was out $100,000.
Yeah, absolutely.
And maybe actually that's a property you need to stay really close to.
Yeah.
And really understand the vendor's motivations and ask the agent, why is the vendor selling? Okay, they need to settle another property or I don't know what it may be, or it's a deceased estate. That's a highly motivated vendor and they will sell at any price. And they've just all missed the mark on the pricing, and this one's a good opportunity.
Yeah. And when you're spending a Saturday as a buyer going out to, inspection after inspection, and the norm is to have, between 10 and 20 groups who are open for inspection, certainly on the first weekend, close to that 20, particularly if it's quoted conservatively.
Love that word in relation.
I know. And so that's what you deem as social proof, that the property is a good quality property. You've got, buyers who look like you, talk like you, walk like you, right next to you, also considering the property you're considering. You think, yes, I'm in the right place. I'm in, I'm on the ball here. And then you go to the next house, which actually ticks all of your boxes in terms of accommodation, location, nice quiet residential street, north-facing backyard, and you're the only buyer there. And you think to yourself, shit, what have I done here? Is something wrong with the product? And you're looking at the agent, and the agent is now on you like white on rice because you are the only buyer in that house. And you think, oh, my God, he's desperate or she's desperate or they're desperate. And I'm the only buyer here and I want to run. I'm running from this house. And so you run. And the only reason oftentimes, 9 times out of 10, when we're talking about A-grade property, of course, nothing to do with main road property, you will always be the only buyer in the house. When you're talking about Dandenong roads and North roads and things like that. But in those scenarios where that property actually does fit your criteria and it is a suitable option, but there was no one else there, have a look at the price, drill down on whether or not you think it's correct, because we buy overpriced property all the time.
It's so funny because we get this in consults all the time. Well, how many off-market properties do you buy? And I'm like, maybe ask us how many properties we buy within or below the quote range.
Yeah.
That's a more relevant question, and that's how you should be shopping advocates. If I hear another advocate bang on they buy 70% of their properties off market, that advocate's overpaying for stock or buying compromised stock. Like there is a small portion of good properties that sell off market, and it's probably about 20 to 30%, and that's what we're selling off market. But I just bought one in Ringwood the other day. They went to auction, quote range of $1,070,000 to $1,170,000, passed in, sat on the market for a few weeks after auction. Everyone starts to think, what's wrong with this property? Why is it not moving? So then the asking price was set at like $1,070,000, and then suddenly we got it for $1,050,000 or less. And it was such good buying. The fundamentals of the property are so good. And I just thought, gosh, this is the case study. Like this is why people need to be understanding the market they're looking in, understanding the value of real estate, doing their own research, because sometimes agents miss the mark in pricing. Sometimes they have to price according to the vendor's expectations, which are too high, but ultimately they will meet the market and that price will drop.
Yeah.
But
and sometimes they just get it wrong accidentally. It isn't a science. We're dealing with humans and their emotions and what they, how in love are they with a property? How can you gauge that mathematically? You just can't really.
No.
So, yeah, another great example. And this is just time and time and time again. We buy properties like this.
Yeah.
But quoted 3 to 3.3 in Caulfield North, amazing, big, sprawling family home, fantastic property. Nothing wrong with it to the eye. But in comparison to everything else that was on the market at the time, and there just happened to be sort of 5 or 6 different properties that were selling that week, the week prior, they were all quoted 2.7 to 2.9 or 2 point something, top end 2.85. So this looked out of budget to my clients, which was their words, or that one's out of budget. And B, it looked expensive. If someone did go through all of those ones that were in the high twos and then this one that was 3 to 3.3, they'd think, well, that's too expensive for that property. It actually should be in line with these ones. So all of these ones quoted in the high twos end up selling for just right up under 3 mil, which is, good, strong prices for them, what they're worth. This one, 3 to 3.3, passed in. Within 10 days of it passing in, the asking price was 3.25. We bought it for 2.8.
Yeah, wow.
And it's like, everyone who would have seen that result come through will have gone, what?
Kicking themselves.
If I had have known, I could buy it for 2.8. And you don't know. You need to dig into it to find out.
Yeah, chat
vendor
to the agent.
motivations, agent motivations. That agent might be on their way for a little overseas holiday that week.
And they need to get it
They
done.
need to get it done.
Wrapped up, quick, smart. But I think that's a really good point about staying close to the agent when you're looking at a property, and it does feel like there's not too many people walking through it. There's not too much interest. What's going on here? Why is that the case? Because you can get some really, really good buys like you did that one. I mean, that's fantastic. Your clients would have been stoked.
Oh, wrapped. We love a tear. I like to see some tears. That's how I know.
Tears.
Yeah, that's how I know they're really happy. Is when they start crying.
Actually, I did have tears in a Clifton Hill after an auction, but they had been looking for so long by themselves, and she was just so exhausted and over it. And
it's usually like obviously happiness, but it's I think mostly the feeling for people once they've purchased a property at a good price and something they love is relief.
I was just gonna say
relief. Like it's so stressful.
I know.
And housing, particularly when it's like, a family with kids involved or, it just adds another layer to the pressure as adults. I've got to get this right and I've got to make this happen and it's up to me to do it for my family and like it's a lot.
Oh, it's so much.
Yeah.
I think overquoting, to be honest, happens. We see it more often in probably areas with older demographics selling because they're probably a little bit more conservative. They're by the book. They want to do the right thing. They don't want to mislead anyone. And so they really do their quote range. Their reserve is typically at the bottom of the quote range oftentimes.
Yes, exactly.
And that's where they've got it wrong. And despite the agent saying, yes, I understand that, but this one, which is what we're going to be competing against, is quoted 300 grand under, they're like, no, this is how we're selling our real estate.
And ultimately, the two properties will sell for roughly the same price, but they'll probably go through a different process.
Yeah.
So the conservatively quoted one will sell under competition on auction day and the overquoted one will sell 2 weeks later, private sale, same price.
But it's interesting the buyer feeling of buying an underquoted property and seeing all that competition and we won and we beat like 4 other buyers and the feeling of buying an overquoted property where there wasn't any competing interest and you're left sort of like, was that a good price or how do we feel? And I think I know my lovely Ringwood clients do listen to this podcast, so I hope they hear this story and have confidence in it all. But I think the overquoted ones and the feeling that they'll get is when they sell for a massive price.
Yeah.
Like when they've quoted it correctly, they've done a few little minor tweaks and updates to a property and then they're getting a massive upswing.
Yeah.
Like they'll feel joy and they'll see the competition on the other side.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's like so many billionaires will say that they make their money on their purchase, not on their sale.
Yeah, probably millionaires as well.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, millionaires, billionaires.
Millionaires?
I don't know.
100%,
Anyway, it's funny. We wanted to cover this topic because everyone bangs on about underquoting, hate on agents, and we want to put it out there that sometimes they just miss the mark. Sometimes it is the vendor's expectation, is in line with the vendor's expectations. Do your own research. Make sure you understand the market and the value of real estate in the market you're looking at, or get a great advocate that knows the area. And also cover overquoting, because people just don't get it, and there's some really, really A-grade property that have just missed the pricing mark, and you should snap them up, and you can get them in the quote range or even below the quote range.
Yeah. They're the ones I feel like are the best wins for us.
100%.
All right, Tabitha Rob.
The time has come.
F, marry, kill.
You know it.
All right. Underquoted.
Okay.
And you have to fight it out against 4 other bidders.
Okay.
You buy it, but it's underquoted. You have to fight it out against 4 other bidders. Or it's overquoted. There's no interest, and it takes 2 weeks to negotiate the sale. Or it's off market, and you've got an inflated asking price.
Well, I'm definitely marrying overquoted. No interest. 2-week negotiation. Slow and steady wins the race. Like, I'm not in a rush. No pressure. I know I'm gonna get a good property under the quote range, but it's slow and steady wins the race. Oh, look, I'm effing underquoted because I love a bit of competition and I love a fight to the death, especially if I come out with a win. And then killing off market. Like, no one wants that. You're fighting with like a demotivated vendor because they haven't paid the marketing costs and like committed to the selling process. They're pie in the sky, inflated reserve. I don't want a bar of it. Killing that off.
I know. And if it meant that you could get them down on price, yeah, maybe I'd F you. But I think I'm the same. I'd marry overquoted, no interest. I'll set the pace.
Yeah.
We will get it for the right price. Don't you worry. Stick with me. Slowly does it. And yeah, F, underquoted, fight it out against 4 bidders. I hate that. I love it's very exciting, but oftentimes you've really got to push on what you'll end up paying for the property.
Yeah, but it feels good.
It feels good.
It's like winning a sports competition.
And like for the buyer, from their perspective, how you bought the property is oftentimes how you sell it. So hopefully you'll generate the same sort of level of competition when you go to sell. And an unmotivated, inflated asking price off market, oftentimes I won't even look at it.
Yeah.
I'll physically inspect it.
No, because the vendor's not committed to selling. They're crazy on price.
I say to the
thanks,
agent.
but no thanks.
Yeah, I say to the agent, let me know when they've come down X, to X price.
Yeah.
So I'll be here at this price. You let me know.
Oh, it's
and I say to the agent, your job to get them to sell.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. Thanks for listening.
Bye.